The Texas dust clung to everything, the soul, the clothes, and that day, Wyatt Rowe's face. The late afternoon sun painted the sky a bloody orange, an omen no one could read. On his knees, the barrel of a rifle pressing into his neck, Wyatt tasted the bitter earth his father had taught him to love. The man humiliating him, Clayton Bradford, wore the smile of someone who had never known an honest day's work. His eyes, small and cold as a serpent's, swept across the breadth of the Rowe ranch with a vulture's greed. "See, boy?" Bradford's voice was soft, almost a cloying poison. "This is progress. The law. Signed papers, government seals. This land isn't yours anymore. Never was, really." Around them, Bradford's men, brutes with more muscle than conscience, chuckled low. Wyatt's neighbors, drawn by the noise, watched from a distance, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They were good men, but fear was a crueler overseer than any colonel. Wyatt didn't answer. His mind was elsewhere, years ago, in a dark room that smelled of sickness and the end. His father's bony hand held his breath a faint wheeze. "Promise me, Wyatt. Promise me you'll never let them take this ground. Crockett told me once. He said the land remembers those who defend it. Our memory is here." He had promised, a promise made to a dying man, a sacred oath now dissolving into dust beneath Clayton Bradford's boot. Bradford pushed the rifle harder. "I said, did you understand, boy?" Then, with a gesture of pure contempt, he grabbed Wyatt by the collar and dragged him several yards, his young, strong body humiliated over the stones and dust. The outlaw's laughter echoed through the valley. Clayton Bradford was more than a land thief. He was an architect of despair. He'd arrived in the county less than a year ago, with refined manners, money from unknown sources, and an army of lawyers and armed men. He spoke of a new Texas, a Texas of contracts and railroads, but his actions reeked of the old world of tyranny. He bought judges, intimidated sheriffs, and used the law as a bludgeon to break the spirit of the pioneers. To him, honor was weakness and faith foolishness. Wyatt had seen the signs. Months before, old Josiah Dixon had lost his land the same way, with a document that appeared from nowhere, bearing a signature he swore he never made. Then came Widow Miller. One by one, the small ranches that formed the backbone of that community were being swallowed by Bradford's shadow. Wyatt, through faith or stubbornness, believed it would be different with him. His land deed was old, solid, signed by men whose names were pillars of Texas's founding. He believed in justice, in the system his parents and grandparents had fought to build, a faith that now seemed naive. Bradford finally let go, leaving him fallen like a torn sack of grain. "Clear it all out by morning. I want this place empty. Anything left, including you, will be treated as trespassing." He turned to leave, satisfied, the master of all he surveyed. But as his men mounted their horses, a warm wind blew from the west, raising dust in swirling eddies, and in that wind, almost imperceptible, a sound seemed to come, a distant echo. It wasn't the sound of horses or drums. It was something deeper, the vibration of an old promise, a name whispered by the land itself, a name that Clayton Bradford, in his arrogance, would never bother to learn. If you believe the law of the strongest always wins, wait to see what happens when a hero's memory is awakened. The humiliation was a wound that burned more than any cut. That night, Wyatt Rowe didn't sleep. He sat on the porch of the house that would soon no longer be his, watching the stars that seemed indifferent to his pain. Every plank of that porch, every nail, held a story. The mark on the wood where his father taught him to carve his first bird, the worn step where his mother sat to peel apples. Now, all of it belonged to Clayton Bradford. The injustice was a knot in his throat, a weight that choked him. The next day, he did what any honorable man would do. He went to town. But the town was no longer the place of community and justice he knew. It was Bradford's fiefdom. The sheriff, a man who once shook his hand firmly, could now barely meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Wyatt," he murmured, adjusting his belt, "but the papers are in order. The judge validated them. My hands are tied." The judge, a fat, sweaty man who owed his position and comfort to Bradford. Wyatt didn't even need to enter the courthouse to know the answer. The law, which should have been a shield for the righteous, had become the weapon of the corrupt. Bradford, to solidify his power and his message, didn't let Wyatt's humiliation die on the ranch. He spread the story through town, painting Wyatt as a stubborn squatter, a foolish youth refusing to accept progress. Some believed him. Others, out of fear, pretended to. In a few days, Wyatt became an outcast. The men who once greeted him now crossed the street to avoid him. The general store owner suddenly could no longer sell him credit. With every averted glance, every closed door, Bradford tightened the noose, not just on his land, but on his dignity. The height of the abuse came a week later. Bradford organized a party at the Rowe Ranch, now renamed Bradford's Progress. He invited all the important men in the county to show off his new property. Wyatt, temporarily living in the barn of a compassionate neighbor who helped him in secret, watched the lights, heard the music and laughter that desecrated his family's memory from afar. In that moment, despair hit him with the force of a punch. He was alone, helpless. A flashback took him back once more to his father's deathbed. The image was clearer now. His father, with his last ounce of strength, pointed to a small wooden chest in the corner of the room. Inside, Wyatt, the old powder horn Crockett gave me. It's not pretty, but it's honest, like him. The powder horn was a simple object made of ox horn, with rustic carvings of a bear and a lone star. He told me a man's word is worth more than any sealed paper, and his word is in there. Take care of it. It's proof this land was won with courage, not pen ink. At the time, Wyatt thought they were just the ramblings of a feverish man. Words of comfort, a relic of a heroic time long gone. But now, in the darkness of the barn, as Bradford's music mocked his loss, those words returned with new weight. He had nothing left but a promise and an old powder horn. Bradford, secure in his victory, didn't realize that in cornering Wyatt Rowe, he wasn't dealing with just a young farmer. He was dealing with the echo of Davy Crockett. The colonel didn't know it, but by stepping onto that ranch and desecrating the memory that lived there, he had just awakened the wrong man. Hope, sometimes, is born from the depths of despair. Exhausted by anger and sorrow, Wyatt finally understood. Brute force wouldn't defeat Bradford. The law was bought. The only way out was to fight with a weapon Bradford didn't understand. Honor. His father's memory guided him. There was a name his father mentioned in his stories, an old war friend, one of the few left from that era of giants, a man who, they said, lived isolated in the hills, bitter with the new Texas, but still loyal to the old. Amos Hughes. Wyatt took what little he had left, Crockett's powder horn, a piece of bread, and the stubbornness inherited from his father, and set off. The journey to Amos Hughes' cabin was long and silent. The path was steep, the air thin. It was as if Amos had chosen a place where the modern world couldn't reach him. The cabin was rustic, guarded by an old hunting dog that growled as Wyatt approached. Amos Hughes appeared at the door. He was a man carved by life, his face a map of battles and losses, his eyes a deep gray, tired of seeing human stupidity repeat itself. He looked Wyatt up and down. "What do you want, boy? If you come to sell the Bible, I've already got one. If you've come for help, I've got none left to give." His voice was as rough as the bark of a century-old oak. Wyatt wasn't intimidated. He told a story. He spoke of the land, his father, Clayton Bradford. Amos listened impassively, his face unreadable. At the end, he shook his head. "It's the same old story. The vultures always come after the lions. Your father was a lion. Bradford is a vulture. There's nothing I can do. The time of lions is over." He turned to go inside, ending the conversation. Despair made Wyatt act. "My father said you knew Crockett. He left me this." Wyatt held out the powder horn. Amos stopped. He turned slowly, his eyes fixed on the object. He approached and took it with unexpected reverence. His calloused fingers traced the carvings of the bear and the star. A different glint appeared in his eyes. "I saw Davy himself carve this," he whispered, his voice suddenly choked. "On a cold night near the Alamo. He gave it to your father because the boy saved his life from a surprise attack. He said, one day, this little object might be worth more than all the gold in Mexico." In that instant, Amos's barrier of bitterness broke. He looked at Wyatt, and for the first time, he didn't see a desperate boy, but the son of a hero. "What Bradford doesn't know, boy," Amos said, a new fire in his eyes, "is that Crockett didn't trust words on the wind. He trusted well-kept secrets." Carefully, Amos Hughes twisted the base of the powder horn. With a soft click, a small compartment opened. Inside, tightly rolled, was a piece of yellowed parchment, protected by a thin layer of wax. It wasn't a common deed. It was an original map of the land grant, hand-drawn, with the signatures of witnesses that would make any judge tremble. And more importantly, it contained an annotation by Crockett, describing an agreement with the original settlers, a pact of honor that invalidated any forced or fraudulent transaction. It was proof, the weapon they needed. In the following days, Amos's cabin became a headquarters. They didn't plan an attack, but an ambush of another kind. Amos, with his forgotten contacts, discovered Bradford's weakness, his ego. The man was planning a grand public celebration to announce his candidacy for state senator, using the success of his acquisitions as his platform. It would be the perfect stage. They didn't need an army. They just needed the right moment, the truth, and the courage to reveal it. As the sun rose over the hills on the day of the celebration, no one in town noticed the lone rider setting off towards his destiny. But Davy Crockett would have recognized him, the look of one who doesn't go home without justice. The town square was packed. Flags waved, a band played lively tunes, and Clayton Bradford, on a makeshift platform, was delivering a speech with the confidence of an emperor. He spoke of the future, of order, of prosperity, while beside him stood the judge and the sheriff, smiling like well-paid puppets. The crowd, a mix of supporters and intimidated onlookers, applauded at the right moments. Bradford was the picture of unshakable power. He was about to finish his speech, his arms open to receive adulation, when a clear, firm voice cut through the air. "The land you call progress, Mr. Bradford, has a name, and that name was paid for with the blood of honorable men." Everyone turned. There stood Wyatt Rowe at the entrance to the square. He wasn't dusty as they'd last seen him. He was clean, standing tall, his shoulders straight. In his hands he held not a weapon, but an old parchment. Fear swept through the crowd, followed by a murmur of astonishment. Bradford frowned, irritated by the interruption. "Arrest this man," he ordered the sheriff. But the sheriff hesitated. There was something different about Wyatt, an authority that didn't come from money or power, but from conviction. Before anyone could move, another figure emerged from the crowd. Amos Hughes, his face etched by time, walked slowly to stand beside Wyatt. His presence silenced the square. Many there didn't know him, but the older one's eyes widened. Amos was a legend, a ghost from Texas's glorious past. "I fought alongside this young man's father," Amos said, his voice resonating with the weight of history. "And I saw Davy Crockett hand him the document that proves legitimate ownership of those lands, a document that Mr. Bradford, with his fraudulent papers, conveniently ignored." Panic began to set in on Bradford's face. "This is nonsense, lies from a senile old man and a criminal," he yelled, but his voice had a high-pitched tone of desperation. Wyatt took a step forward and calmly unrolled the map. He didn't show it to the judge or the sheriff. He showed it to the people. He told the story of the document, Crockett's annotation, the Pact of Honor. He didn't speak with hatred, but with dignified sadness. He spoke of the promise he had made to his father and of the greater promise they all, as Texans, should honor. That's when the tide turned. An old farmer, the first to lose his land to Bradford, took off his hat, then another and another. In a minute, all the honest men in the square stood bareheaded, not in surrender, but in deep respect for Wyatt and what he represented. The band stopped playing. The judge began to retreat into the shadows. The sheriff looked at Bradford, then at the people, and slowly took the star from his chest and placed it on the ground. The charade was over. Bradford stood alone on the platform, his power crumbling in the open air. He wasn't brought down by bullets, but by truth. He saw the contempt in the eyes of people who once feared him, and that was a worse punishment than any jail cell. At that moment, as if summoned by justice itself, a small group of Texas Rangers who had been investigating corruption in the region entered the square. They hadn't come for Wyatt. They had come for Bradford, drawn by the quiet investigations Amos had instigated with old friends. As the people gathered and watched the kernel of greed being handcuffed, no one cheered victory. They merely watched in silence, a heavy, meaningful silence. That day, they didn't just witness justice being done. They remembered what it was like to do it. A year later, the Rowe Ranch flourished again. The broken fence had been repaired, the field was plowed, and the smell of fresh bread once again wafted from the kitchen. Peace had returned, but it was a different, stronger peace, forged in adversity. Wyatt Rowe hadn't become a rich or powerful man. He was what he had always been, a farmer. But now, when he walked through town, men tipped their hats in a gesture of genuine respect. Mothers pointed him out and told their children the story of the young man who faced a giant with truth as his only weapon. Clayton Bradford was never seen again. Some said he rotted in a federal prison. Others that he fled to Mexico, living out his days as a broken and forgotten man. His defeat wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. His fall restored the community's faith in the law and, more importantly, in itself. The ranches he had stolen were returned to their rightful owners. The corrupt judge and sheriff disappeared, replaced by men of integrity. The shadow of fear dissipated, giving way to the sun of freedom. One afternoon, Amos Hughes rode to the ranch. The two men sat on the porch, the same one where Wyatt had felt the peak of despair a year earlier. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They shared a silent understanding, the camaraderie of those who had fought and won. Amos looked at the horizon, at the hills tinged gold by the setting sun. "Your father would be proud," he said simply. Wyatt nodded. His heart full, he picked up Crockett's old powder horn, which now occupied a place of honor on the mantelpiece. He held it in his hands, feeling the weight of the history, courage, and sacrifice it represented. Justice hadn't come from a legendary man riding in to save them. It had come from the legacy he had left behind, the idea that a man's honor is his fortress, and that the land belongs to those who defend it with their hearts. Texas, he understood, wasn't just a piece of dirt. It was a promise that as long as there were people willing to stand up for the truth, freedom would never be defeated. The powerful called Wyatt a fool. The people called him a hero. But he knew that true courage needs no witnesses. It only needs a just cause. If you were moved by this story of courage and honor and believe that the values that founded Texas still live, subscribe to our channel. Share this video with everyone who identifies with Texan pride and the fight for justice. And don't forget to comment from which city or state you're watching. Your participation keeps these stories alive.